It's not on, apparently. Helps, doesn't it? I'm going to check the one on here as well. Yeah, that one also will need to be turned on by whoever steps up. So just to warn you. So, I think we've just got a few people who are just getting some food and drink to sit down. Has everyone now got their headsets on? Looks like most of you. You can't hear through it? Not very well? Apparently they can't hear very well. Can you hear? Yes, yes. We've got some thumbs up now, so hopefully. Maybe there's probably a volume on the side. So yeah, brilliant. So my name is Bev Cornaby. I'm from the Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership, where there I am both our Director of Policy and Systems Change Collaborations and also Director for one of our corporate leaders group, the UK Corporate Leaders Group. This session today is brought to you by ourselves. We are going to be bringing work from both our UK Corporate Leaders Group, our European Corporate Leaders Group, but also something we have which is our Corporate Leaders Network as well, which we'll explain to you a bit further as we go through. This event is focusing on the energy transition. So last year at COP28, we had agreement in terms of the tripling renewables target and also doubling energy efficiency. This was quite a key target to go forward in terms of actually how we enable the energy transition. Business is going to play a key role in that, as is government at a national level. We're therefore going to be exploring through this session how that can happen and what are businesses already doing, what can governments do, and how do we really accelerate that towards 2030. We're going to have a number of different speakers. We've got Maria, who I'll introduce in a moment. We'll then be introducing more of our work around the Corporate Leaders Network, particularly a campaign we have called More Renewables. We'll then have a panel discussion with business and policy experts. And then we're going to close with a fireside chat between myself and somebody from the UK government who is now in a position which is around actually accelerating the UK transition, energy transition towards 2030. So right now I'm going to hand over to Maria to give us a few opening words. Thank you, Maria.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be with you. I have to say that Women Business is a coalition. And we're a very proud partner of CLG Europe and UK. And it's always a pleasure to work with them, and we work very collaboratively, and it's amazing to see the progress that the organization has made and is doing. So during this week, I have joined some of the high-level meetings, and I was quite impressed in one of them, because last year, when we achieved the UA consensus, there were three things: Article 28, tripling renewables, doubling energy efficiency, and transition away from fossil fuels. And honestly, we pushed a lot through the Fossil to Clean campaign. We mobilized business. CLG was fundamental for the success of the campaign. But I thought, you will see, they will talk about renewables and they won't talk about transition away from fossil fuels. But guess what? They do. They do. And so in the same ways that countries, as they're developing their NDCs, are seeing how to include these three things on their NDCs, so do business have to do so as they develop their own transition plans. And what I said today in an IEA dialogue, and I repeat here, is that maybe we should start on how we're going to transition away from fossil fuels, and then we do the rest. Because we need to stop burning fossil fuels, because they produce emissions. I know you know that this is true, right? But we tend to forget about this simple thing, okay? And so if we don't stop burning fossil fuels, we're never going to make it. And renewables will keep growing. But if we keep the demand on fossil fuels, they will. And it's easy because all the economics are there, right? And the solutions are there. But sometimes the economics are not there, or sometimes there are other barriers. So when I spoke today to the IEA group, I said, you know, when business need is clear rules of the game, consistency. So investments that are due, you know, that last 15, 20 years cannot be subject to countries that change their mind every 4 years. Because if they do so, then companies are not going to believe that those countries are serious and they will go elsewhere. And that's why it's so exciting when we hear about the NDC in the UK and the way that the UK government is coming, and I know we're going to hear from them later, that they see that their NDC, it's the country investment plan. It is how the country is going to attract investment, and obviously they see a great opportunity now that is arising, because if there is political will, if there is policy coherence, if they put a good planning in place and permitting that allows for the transition to happen fast enough, they will gain not only energy security, they will also bring cheaper energy to the people in the country that will benefit from it. So you probably think that COP30 is going to be a very important COP, okay? But I tell you that no. What is important is what is going to happen from now until then, and not then. Because we need to work with countries as they develop their NDCs. And I have never heard countries so willing to work with business to develop, to co-create, and to develop policies that will attract the investments that they need. And I truly mean it, because we had yesterday here the German government, and they were selling their country, and we have Brazil that they were selling their process because they see that they need to work with you. And I think after 29 COPs, we have come to be mature to know that we cannot do this alone, and that business and government need to work together and co-create these policies. It's quite interesting, but because this, we come to COP to be inspired, and I spoke to, well, I think I can quote him, Francesco Starace, former CEO of Enel, and he was telling me, you see, Maria, we go through waves of innovation. Now renewables have gone through the wave of innovation, now they are competitive. Now it's a storage, then it will be hydrogen, and one wave depends on the other, and it lasts certain amount of time. Now, because we don't have time, and we need to bring these technologies as soon as possible, what I'm telling policymakers, and I'm telling you, is that we need to develop original and very creative policy approaches. We need to find cost-effective ways to reduce the green premium, because producing green steel is expensive. But if we manage to bring some support to it, public support plus consumer willingness to pay a little bit more, not a lot more, then we can bring the scale that is needed to reduce the cost. So I know that you have a great place to develop these innovative approaches, which is CLG, with incredible brains that will help you navigate this. I have here my friend Gonzalo that has a leadership position not only in CLG Europe, but also in Spain and in the networks that you have. And so it's only by tapping that knowledge that we can do. And we have a very special person here in the room that has been going from public to to private, and whose birthday is today. And so I wish to Miguel, who's over there, happy birthday to him. Sorry, Miguel. So over to you, Beverley. A pleasure to be with you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Maria. So I mentioned our corporate leaders groups and our corporate leaders network. With our corporate leaders groups, we are taking the voice of business to governments. And what we're doing there is asking them to be more ambitious and to learn from actually what business are doing, but in doing so and being more ambitious, to also drive further ambition in business. With that, we also have a corporate leaders network that I mentioned, and that is connecting our own corporate leaders groups, which operate in the UK and the EU, with others globally. And therefore, we have a number of members that are situated in different countries. This campaign, which my colleague Aoife is about to introduce, is actually a campaign we've been doing through that network, which is about getting more renewables. So I'm going to hand over to Aoife now. Thank you, Aoife.
Thanks, Bev, and also thank you to Maria for highlighting the importance of fossil to clean, which we're very proud to partner on, and the need to both accelerate renewables and also phase out fossil fuels simultaneously. At CLN, the Corporate Leaders Network, we've been working over the course of 2024 on a new campaign called Robust Laws for More Renewables. And as I'm sure you all know, the energy transition is crucial to meaningful climate action. But within that, renewables are the central enabler for decarbonisation of the broader economy. And while the climate advocacy landscape is quite complicated with geopolitical uncertainty, disinformation, voluntary and involuntary standards. We really believe it's quite challenging for businesses, and part of what they're saying they need are laws to enable the energy transition and enable the acceleration of renewables. More specifically, we're calling through our businesses for government to implement these specific laws. So we want stronger language on renewables in international treaties. We want to reform investor-state dispute settlements to preclude actions which protect fossil fuels currently. We want to streamline the permitting and grid access process, which you'll hear more about in our business panel later. We want to remove fossil fuel subsidies and redirect those subsidies towards renewables instead. And we want to ensure that climate, nature, and human rights considerations are embedded in environmental impact assessments. We really want to harmonize laws across countries because our corporate leaders network is regional across different areas, including Europe, UK, Asia, Latin America. And we really believe that harmonizing laws will unlock more renewables for more people. We're hearing from our businesses that they want these robust regulation in place so that they can do the job that they need to. And we really believe that these businesses need to speak to each other to more effectively advocate with their government about the legal requirements that they need to play their part in the energy transition. So fundamentally, we're asking governments to implement robust laws for more renewables. And if you'd like more details on our campaign asks, you can scan this QR code. I'd also like to flag, as we look at the outcomes of COP29 beginning to appear and moving into COP30, there are some key things that we need to see. I'd set these out as 4 main points. So we need public finance directed towards renewables and renewable infrastructure like grids and storage, particularly in developing countries. We need law and policy reform to enable this private sector presence in the renewables market globally. As Maria said earlier, we need to clear time-bound targets within the NDCs on renewables. And lastly, as we've discussed already, we need fossil fuel phase-out. So the CLN is proud to be working with the various Latin American stakeholders in the run-up to COP30, and we'll actually be launching an Ibero-American network of green growth groups, and we'll be delighted to have you attend this event on Tuesday, where we'll be launching the group, and we'll be working together on corporate climate policy advocacy in the run-up to COP30. That's on Tuesday. It'd be great to see you there. I'm now going to hand over to Sveti to moderate our panel, which is a brilliant mix of business leaders and policymakers. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Aoife. As already mentioned, we have a wonderful panel, a mix of business and policymakers. I want to introduce you to come to the stage, and while they're settling in, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. Tsvetelina Kuzmanova, I am part of CISL, Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership. I work in Brussels, where I lead the EU sustainable finance work, the EU policy work, and I work very closely with the Corporate Leaders Group Europe. So this is an intersection, cross-sectoral private sector group of different business leaders that are aiming for ambitious transition, a resilient and competitive Europe. And we work in Brussels in a very intersection between business and policy, and this is exactly the panel that we have here with us today. As you heard from Maria and from my colleagues, obviously we have a lot of challenges ahead of us, especially within the energy system. So we are really trying to focus on changing, altering the energy transition, aiming for energy transition by altering the energy systems. We obviously have the issue of electrification, energy efficiency, grids, a variety of issues, and some of the challenges that the industry and the sector faces in terms of both financing and scaling up. And with that, I would like to go on to our panel and to start with some of the perspectives from them. We don't have much, I would like to make this a little bit more interactive and to have a little bit of a discussion on some of the opportunities and some of the challenges that the sector faces, but also what is to be expected both at the EU level and here at COP at an international level. So yeah, as it is CLG Europe with a little bit more of a European flavor is the panel. In an unorthodox way, maybe I will keep the policymaker to the very end to hear first from the businesses and then hear your response. So with that, I would like to start with Gonzalo, who is a very core pillar of CLG Europe. So Gonzalo is the chair of CLG and is also the chair of Iberdrola. John.
Okay.
Director of Climate Change, yeah.
Okay. Good afternoon. And so, how is the situation of? We were talking about tripling renewables and electrification. How do we see the situation? I will try to summarize it in 3 points. First, photovoltaic is going quite well. It's one of the only 3 technologies in line with the net zero scenario for 2030. In the case of wind, it's not moving at a necessary speed. Why? Because it's much more complex to develop. So we need to keep on photovoltaic and to accelerate wind energy. Second point, growing renewable capacity is very good. But in general, the electrification of the economy is not moving forward. And I'm talking about industries, about buildings, and about transport. So we need to develop renewable fast, but also increase electrification at the same speed, because this is the demand for renewables. We are not going to reach our climate objectives just with cleaning the power sector. So, as Maria was mentioning, we need to decarbonize the rest of the economy that currently is based on fossil fuels. And the third message, probably the biggest hurdle to renewables today in Europe and to electrification is the lack of grid. So the International Energy Agency said very clearly, for every million you spend on renewables, you need to spend 1 million in networks. And networks today are not developing at the necessary speed. So, and what is important is we need networks before the demand for electrification, and we need networks before renewables are constructed. Thank you.
I'm very glad that you touch on grids, because this is yet another issue that I know that currently the European Commission is absolutely looking at, and how to tackle this like more cross-border issue and the financing of it. But we do have here a representative who can tell us a little bit more on grids. We have Matt Hilde with us, who is the head of EU affairs of National Grid. Matt, on to you. You do work a lot on the grids. You do know some of the challenges and how things are happening on the ground. Please tell us a little bit more, and what are the key trends and what to expect.
Thanks very much, and thanks for the invitation to speak. So yeah, I mean, absolutely, we would totally understand the point that has just been made that grids are a potential bottleneck here. I think it's worth just pointing out that nobody talked about grids until about 18 months ago. You know, if you go back 3 years, people were talking about permitting. 2 years ago, people were talking about supply chains. And then suddenly there was this realization that without transmission, you don't get a transition. I know it's a cliche, but it's absolutely true. So, I mean, I think we're very pleased that grids are now up the agenda where they should be. The scale of the challenge is enormous. I mean, if you look at the European Commission Grids Action Plan last year, they estimated a need for about 584 billion of investment in Europe's grids by 2030. From a national grid perspective in the UK, we need to deploy 5 times as much as we have in the last 30 years in the next 6 years. I mean, these are big challenges. But actually, if you look at what's happened in the last 18 months, since there has been an uptick in the political support for this, the trajectory of grid investment has massively accelerated. And the IEA said last week, actually, if that trajectory continues, we're not in a bad place on grids. That said, lots of things do need to change. We need to get permitting right. Permitting is an enormous issue for everyone across Europe. I actually think the EU's done a really good job over the last 3 or 4 years by repeated pieces of legislation that have been really slamming down the time limits for different permitting systems. You know, if you put 1 gigawatt into the system, it's got to be done. Permitting's got to be done in less than 12 months, 18 months for above a gigawatt. Stuff like that actually is working, and we're seeing that with Germany now with a real uptick in the deployment of transmission lines. So the other issue is, of course, connection queues. If you're following grids, you know that everyone complains that there are these enormous connection queues, which is absolutely true. In the UK, we've got a 300 gigawatt queue for projects to come onto the grid, and we need to get that down. That's gone up by 100 gigawatts in the last year, because more and more people are bringing forwards more and more projects. So it's something everyone faces, and we need to basically change our systems in terms of grid connections to make it much more, much faster. Move from a first come first serve perspective to a connect or get out of the queue perspective. Reduce and reorder the pipelines, and prioritise more mature projects. And stuff like that will have an impact to deal with what Gonzalo said in terms of building out as quickly as possible. And I think the final point I'd make is just it's not just about onshore grids. From a northwestern European perspective, the great opportunity is the North Sea. We have shared targets in the North Sea of 300 gigawatts. It's worth just pointing out that offshore wind in the North Sea has a load factor of 55%. That's vast. So we can actually deploy 300 gigawatts in the North Sea. That is a substantial step towards the decarbonisation of Europe. But I was very pleased when you flipped up the slide about the need for harmonisation of rules, because it has to be said the UK's decision to leave the European Union in 2016 has not helped that at all. We are now, I hope, in a different situation, and I hope UK-EU cooperation on cross-border interconnection in the North Sea can really progress, because that's what we need to happen to really deploy the grids as quickly as possible.
Thank you. Thank you, Matt. Glad that harmonization also comes up, because harmonization also at the different policies at the EU level, but among different industries and different sectors. And we have with us yet another distinguished guest from CLG Europe, who can tell us a little bit more on some of the challenges within their sector. So with us we have Simon Hansel-Thomas, who is the Global Director of Climate and Nature of Inca IKEA. So global business, please tell us a little bit about some of the trends and some of the challenges. What is your role? What is the role of businesses in, accelerating the transition in the energy sector?
Super. Does everyone hear me all right? Because the mic, yeah, looking good. Okay, so I work for IKEA. For those of you that don't know IKEA, we're a large Swedish home furnishing company. People laugh, but some people don't understand who we are. We're famous for meatballs and very well-designed furniture and good prices. But we're actually also increasingly famous for renewable energy. So we've actually invested 4 billion in renewable energy, and we have a target to invest 7.5 by 2030. So our CEO always says we're a furniture company, but we're also a medium-sized utility now, with the amount of megawatts that we're generating from renewables. So that's a big part of our approach. Then, of course, we're also sourcing renewable electricity for our own buildings. So we're at around 98% in our own buildings now. We have a challenge still in South Korea and India, where we can't get hold of renewable electricity for our stores. But we're hoping to close that by next year. We're also looking now at matching that energy production and consumption and looking at 24/7 approaches, a bit like Google and Microsoft are leading as well. We just made an announcement yesterday, actually, if any of you saw it, that we're going to invest 1.5 billion in renewable heating and cooling in our offices, in our stores. That's going to be a big impact, actually. So our store footprint is only 2% of our full footprint, but we need to sort that out before we can start looking at scope 2 and 3 as well. And of course, electrification of the store environment. We're also looking at vehicles as well. So we've got a target to all of the products you get delivered to your door from IKEA will be 100% EV electric vehicle by 2025 next year. So a big renewable energy agenda and a big electrification agenda. And of course, that puts pressure on the grid. We're already seeing pressures on the grid in certain countries, Netherlands, for example, Italy, where as we add more EV chargers at our stores, as we bring on more renewable heating and cooling, we're already seeing that grid capacity is strained. And so welcome what you were saying about grid capacity needing to improve. So, yeah.
Thank you. Obviously, businesses have a very different and diverse role to play for the energy transition, both within their own operations, but also extending beyond only the operations of businesses. And with that, probably in a slightly tougher position situated between the businesses, we do have a representative from the European Commission in such a challenging time and such a defining moment for the European Commission of setting the targets and setting the goals for the new incoming European Commission. We have with us Jan Dusik, who is Deputy Director at DG Klima, so not DG Ener. But we obviously hear from businesses a lot of asks and a lot of challenges on both harmonizing the not only the policy, but also the whole framework of how everything works together. There are obviously financing needs and challenges. But now having heard from the businesses, do share some of your insights. Where is the Commission heading and Europe as a whole heading? The energy sector, but as a whole, the European Clean Deal, the upcoming European Clean Deal, which is a very promising development, but we'd definitely like to hear from you more on that.
Well, thank you very much. And I must disagree with you that I would feel uncomfortable in this company, because what I'm hearing is not really contravening with the thinking that we have in the European Commission. When we look at the transition of the Commission, and the new Commission should take the office on the 1st of December this year, basically we see a lot of what Maria mentioned in the beginning about the predictability of public policies, and the continuity of the von der Leyen Commission 1 into von der Leyen Commission 2 on the subject of Green Deal is very strong. She made it clear when she went to the European Parliament and when she presented the set of the mission letters to the commissioners, including the Executive Vice President Teresa Ribera, who will be overseeing the whole green agenda in the new college. So maybe we will enlarge the scope, and instead of Green Deal, talk about Clean Deal in making sure there are the right connections. But the legislation that was adopted, it doesn't change. The direction of travel doesn't change either. It is a direction which we also see here at the COP, is where the world is moving, irrespective of results of elections and political streams and extremes sometimes. So the course for the Commission is very clear. We have we also have the target proposed for 2040 of 90% emission reductions. We have the European climate law with the climate neutrality enshrined in it. That's a piece of legislation which was agreed by all the 27 member states, and there is no backpedaling on that. So that 2050 target is there. We need to see how we get there. And of course, we need to see how we get there in the way that that will allow Europe to have the right economic pace that is competitive. We need to see, and that's again part of the program of the new Commission, what can be simplified, how we can streamline the procedures. The simplification of permitting was mentioned here. That happened over the past 2-3 years, because of course in the meantime the Russia's aggression war in Ukraine has started, and we had to adapt ourselves, and we had to find solutions to be more resilient. The energy prices have become very high and choking the economy. So again, the responses are in the same area. We need to get more decentralized European resources, which can be transferred to the consumers. We are working on it. We are not yet there, and of course we need to be smarter about working in the European Union. So Obviously, we have governments with different political orientation. We have different voices in the European Parliament, but the precondition of this to happen is to strengthen the European energy market that can deliver on the climate solutions that we have committed to do. And we have received several important messages also for the new Commission, such as the report of Mario Draghi about combining the decarbonization with competitiveness. What needs to happen? There are solutions, and we will definitely follow up on the recommendations that are there. There's a lot of work ahead of us as regulators. We want to be receptive to what the businesses are seeing as the essentials to move in that direction. But I think that we can do more than that, and you can do more than that. You can exercise the leadership. You can strengthen the confidence that this is a process that can be managed, and help us find the most efficient pathways to those solutions, and counter sometimes populist views that often can be fed from outside by those who do not wish for the transition, who want to stay in the fossil era for their own benefit. And together, I think we can design those solutions which will work, and which will find ourselves on the right path to 1.5 degree in Europe.
Thank you. It is reassuring, some of the signals and messaging that we hear from you tonight. And before I ask also the other panelists for reflections and what they see as the most needed maybe policies or developments going forward, maybe just as a follow-up question to you, because you also started mentioning the competitiveness, the report that came from Draghi, and DG Klima is in this position where you need to be responsible for all the other different sectors, the work of the different DGs. Obviously, it's a very horizontal work, but also on competitiveness, I think it was a very reassuring. As commissioner hearings were happening during the elections, for example, in the US, a still very strong commitment to what is already on the table at the EU level. So going forward, maybe to put the perspective of the geopolitical dynamic a little bit, where do you see Europe's commitments going forward? Any indication on that front? And with that, I'll ask the other panelists to also think of their reactions to that as well.
Sure. Well, I can move more into my field of competence climate. That obviously we can foresee that there will be important transitions happening as the new administration will take office in the United States. On the other hand, we are very confident that the solution that we have undertaken with Fit for 55, with the EU the EU emission trading scheme, with the whole program of legislation, that it is delivering, and that we are seeing the results. We are seeing the functioning of the carbon market. We are seeing the reduction of emissions. We are seeing the price of the allowance that corresponds to where it needs to be to drive the transition. And we are going into other sectors that will be subject to emission trading scheme, buildings and transport, and possibly others. We will also roll out the CBAM regulation. But the objective of CBAM, which is quite often criticized, it is not about generating money for Europe. It is about driving the emissions down everywhere in the world. And the solutions that we can offer, and the experience that we have with our own policy, and I've been hearing it from many partners around the world, that they are basically looking at us and they are copying and of course adapting to some extent our solutions, but they see that this is functional, and this is the way to use the market mechanisms, to also use the international carbon markets towards decarbonization everywhere. And this is where Europe can have leadership. We have established a task force to promote, to help a number of countries on the path towards developing systems like the ETS, and we feel that this is a new era of cooperation that can accompany the transition also beyond European borders.
Thank you. I do hear the notion of European leadership also very pronounced there. So I do hope that we do see more of that in the future. But maybe to get back to the rest of the panelists and to the business representatives as well, you did hear some of the upcoming trends in the policy space and in the political space. Well, if we manage to solve the politics in Brussels in the near future, I'm sure we can focus more on the policy. But what do you see is needed, both at the EU level, but also here being in Baku? We are discussing some of the key issues, carbon markets among one of them, but also the NDC and NQCG. So what do you see as one of the key top on your wish list for the Commission?
We have great expectations regarding the clean industrial deal that needs to be presented in the following months. So the Draghi report says very clearly, if the industry wants to, European industry wants to be competitive, it needs to be green. But at the same time, if this green industry must be competitive. And in this context, I think it's essential to have an energy system that is competitive, that is clean, and that is secure or resilient, as you said. And I think that the opportunity for Europe is renewables and electrification. And the only thing we need for us is policy certainty. Because policy uncertainty is bad for investment, and I think is good for incumbent, and nowadays the incumbent is not the European industry. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, maybe just to take the political question first. I think I've heard it many times here, but whatever happens in the US, the energy transition is inevitable. I don't think you get many people that would argue with that. And then I think if I've been in a few meetings with Chinese delegates here, they're not slowing down. So I think Europe should keep pace with China. And I think that's absolutely, it should be a race to the top. And if the US chooses to come on board later, that's fine. From a company perspective, we're absolutely committed. We won't change our goals. We have an SBTI, science-based target goal for 2030 and 2050. We're releasing a transition plan in February, and what I'm struck with here is you've got countries launching their NDCs on one hand, and you've got companies launching their transition plans on the other. And if you match those two together, you get a very strong demand signal from companies that can then translate into the NDCs. And of course, transition plans are global and NDCs are local. But for me, there's something that needs to be done there, because I still see maybe not in the EU, but I do see a country level quite a lot of surprise. Oh, wow, you guys actually want this. Almost a surprise that companies are asking for certain regulation. Then if we look at specifics on policies, I think a lot of it's been said already. I think policy certainty is number one. We can't invest if we don't know we're going to have policies for the next few years. IKEA is not a listed company, but we still need that policy certainty. We mentioned grid infrastructure. We also are asking for energy efficiency regulations, which we've got in the EU, but not in all jurisdictions. For renewable energy, the biggest challenge we have is permitting, and it keeps coming up, but it's still a challenge for us in some markets, is incredibly slow permitting processes. We know it can take 6 months, and then it can take 6 years, and it can take longer than 6 years. And so I think, for me, that's an easy fix. Make sure it's equitable, but speed up that permitting. And then a specific IKEA one is retrofitting of buildings and houses, incentivizing and supporting consumers to retrofit their homes is a massive win in terms of the energy bill demand, but also consumers' wallets. So if you want to counter populism, reduce people's energy bill, it's a win-win.
Perfect, thank you. Matt, do you want to come in as well?
Yeah, I mean, thanks. I mean, most of the points I would agree with. Just we've got to keep on going on grids. We need to find the finance for that. The finance is there, and that's certainly the message I've heard over the last few days here. I think the other point is that we need to bring the general public with us. There is always this opposition sometimes to grid infrastructure, so we need to explain to the general population why this is necessary to meet our targets. We need to do it in the most efficient way possible, and we need governments to help us make that case. The other very specific point I would raise is that we need to look at this as Europe as a whole, and that does include the UK. We are physically part of the European energy market. And actually, I mean, I'd really call on the Commission and the British government to remove one of the real problems in the North Sea, which is the carbon border adjustment mechanism and its application to British electricity exports, because we think that will have a really negative impact on investment. So we should start linking the UK and the EU emissions trading systems as soon as possible.
Thank you. Yeah, as mentioned, a lot of the issues are cross-border, and especially in the EU context, very often, at least now, it keeps coming up that we need actually more Europe rather than less Europe, and to try to solve a lot of the issues at hand at the European level. Any reflections on what you heard? And I see a lot of other topics slowly emerging of what is needed to be done more. So, any reflections?
Yes, thank you. No, I'm sure there will be other topics, and that's good and that's healthy. And when we talk about the clean industrial deal, we need to have that sincere talk about what is it that is needed, what is the investment level that is needed, because the Draghi report is also a report about the need for investment. Definitely, grids need to be a big part of that investment, as well as the whole transition towards from fossil fuels to renewable energy, and that requires political buy-in, and the political buy-in will be easier when there is a business buy-in. So the politicians will listen, and obviously there also needs to be the public buy-in, because this is what matters in the elections. So I think that's a task that we have for all of us, starting with myself and you all, to be able to explain this is what needs to happen. This is how we can move from where we are today to where we need to be. This is what is going to imply, and in the end of the day, the quality of life will be better. You will need to consume less energy. You will ultimately get your energy bills down. The states will accompany you with relevant social safeguards, and it needs to be a kind of a Marshall Plan for Europe that everyone will be we part of it. And we need to look at the permitting and the whole red tape. There is red tape. It doesn't always come from Brussels, even though people often say blame Brussels. It's very often somewhere on the way or at a national level. So I think that we need to look where we can make things in a simpler way without undermining the goals, which I agree are very important in terms of predictability. This is where we will be 10-15 years down the road, and let's not change the course after every election.
Thank you. And clarity, coherence, and clear direction of travel is definitely something that keeps coming up. And I was curious that Simon also brought up the transition planning and the transition thinking of businesses, and how this could potentially be also linked to the targets of countries, regions, and even here one of the key discussions at COP is also the NDC and the upcoming plans. I'm curious if any of the panelists have any reflections on the transition thinking, on the transition planning. What would be useful? Obviously, the energy sector is one of the first to spearhead in the transition thinking and the long-term thinking, unlike other industry are more difficult to decarbonize. So on the transition planning and some of the national targets, any reflections on that? What might be more needed, both in Europe and here in the conversations? Any reflections?
Yeah, for me, the point of a transition plan is transparency from a company perspective. So when we launch us in February, we're trying to be honest where we have knowns and where we have unknowns, and to be transparent on the challenges, because if we're going to have an industry transformation, we can't expect to have all the answers now today for 2030 and beyond. So I think my one lookout for the transition plans was they don't become a PR document. They should be a document that is informing stakeholders where you're going and where those challenges could be, because then I think you can get the collaboration with policymakers to unblock some of those challenges. So that would be my main lookout on transition planning.
And ideally linked to some of the opportunities and the incentives at the a policy level as well. Maybe one final round. Oh, do you have an immediate comment?
Just going back on the NDCs and the whole government planning, I would again bring it back to Europe and the national energy climate plans, which should also be investment programs, and this is how we have been encouraging the member states to think about those, and these should be based on a proper discussion at the national level. Now we are still missing almost half of these national energy climate plans, which we were supposed to receive by the end of June. So this is not good news. We will need to exercise our enforcement rules to get those, because then we are also able to draw the next generation of legislation when we have these in place. The social climate plans will be the next ones, and again, this should be a whole government program that is based on a proper stakeholder engagement and careful thinking in terms of the overall economic planning in the country.
Thank you. A very good final note. Maybe one final question to everyone is to maybe zoom out a little bit of our conversation and to come back to here in Baku and some of the key negotiations here. They're obviously more high-level conversations, but this is also very much linked to your day-to-day work, some of the direction of travel, some of the guidance, both internationally at the EU level, and how this will be linked to 2040, 2050 targets, the national plans as well. So any reflections on how the negotiations are going so far here from Baku or the EU level? Any specific asks of what you would like to see happening?
I'm not really following in detail the negotiations. What I'm seeing is that behind climate policies of the different countries, there are industrial policies. And what I'm seeing here is a global competition to attract investments. And I think Europe is in a good position, but it's in a difficult position. And we have to accelerate action if we want to take advantage of these opportunities. And we don't need more objectives. We need policies, because policies and policy certainty is what really changes the behavior of firms and investment. And to stress this idea of policy certainty and policy ambition, because other blocs like the US with the IRA, China, Australia are really trying to take advantage of these opportunities. And I think in Europe we are taking advantage of some of these opportunities, but not enough. I think we really want to accelerate. We need to accelerate.
Yeah, I had 2 points. I think the companies now are moving well beyond the why and also beyond the what. So it's not about plans anymore or goals. Quite frankly, I think we've heard enough plans and goals and commitments. It's in the how. So my one thought would be, how do we move COP even more into the how, away from the goal-setting negotiation, because soon it's going to be too late. So that's one point. The second point is maybe a bit of a funny one, but this is the first multinational meeting as an Englishman where I've actually been proud to show up. For the last few years, it's been very embarrassing. So I think, but seriously, the NDC from the UK is quite strong, which was a relief. We can't undo Brexit, but we can at least try and get back on track. So I feel we obviously need more NDCs like the UK. Brazil, I think, have also come out with quite a strong NDC, and we need more. Follow the UK. Haven't said that for a while.
Maybe to your how, I'll add the how much question as well, but good to hear. I'm curious if we also agree with Gonzalo on the more policy. I guess this is the dream for a policymaker to hear on a panel. We need more policy.
Well, if you need more policies, there's always the European Union, which can produce a few of them. There's never a shortage of policies, but I will not comment on the state of the negotiations. I think that we see the writing on the wall, what needs to happen. We have the science that tells us what to happen. We see we see the economic narrative of it. But of course, not everyone in the negotiating rooms sees it the same way. I think that we will keep the course. We see that it cannot be Europe alone with its 6% of global emissions, and with currently 1/4 of the international finance that is contributing. We will not be able to resolve it on our own. We need the other partners, and that will hopefully also enable the transition in Europe to continue as quickly as it can.
Thank you. Matt, your reflections as well.
Yeah, so just very quickly, I mean, I think the key thing is speed now. I agree, we've got the targets, we've got most of the technologies, but we need to deploy it as quickly as possible. So I think from a government and a European Union perspective, anything policymakers can do to make that as easy as possible for the industry, I think is key. So planning, permitting, supply chain transparency, anything that can help, but also removing the barriers. You know, and some of those barriers may be entirely self-inflicted, particularly coming from a UK perspective. But, you know, that's what we need. And we've got 26 years. That's not a very long time for the level of infrastructure we're looking at. So, and we need regulators to look at it in that way as well. European regulators need to internalise that we have one investment cycle to rewire the entire energy system. So we don't have time to mess around here. So.
Sobering remark in the end. I would very much also like to open the floor for questions from the audience. Maybe while you think about some of your questions, any final remarks, and then we open for questions. All good? I do see a question already.
Thank you. I have a question for Jan on the clean industrial deal. So I don't know how much you can answer because now the commission is on the way to be formed, but we heard the clean industrial deal might come out mid-December. Can you confirm that? And will it be linked to the 2040 target? Will it be like a new European Green Deal or more like a strategy communication like the Green Deal industrial plan was? And lastly, is it linked to investment, either new or reallocation? The new European Competitiveness Fund is in the mix, but we heard that's for the next MFF. So is there any mention to that? And yeah, that's the main question, especially on investments, because there's a huge investment gap in Europe. Part of that has to come from the public sector. So we're hoping stakeholders, clean tech stakeholders, for that to be increased. So. Oh, I'm Adriana Rodriguez from Climate Strategy, and I work with a lot of clean tech and NGOs, associations, so this is a question from many of them.
Well, thank you very much. I totally understand the question. I don't think I have all the answers. As I said, the new commission should start on the 1st of December, subject to confirmation by the Parliament. The Clean Industrial Deal is in the first 100 days of the Commission. I don't expect that it would be presented and adopted before the end of the year, but probably in the first 2 months of the next year. We are still discussing at the technical level the parameters. We need a political guidance from the new commissioners on the key questions like investments. It is supposed to be a policy, but there may be a legislative component as well. It's not going to be a new generation of a Green Deal type of legislation. It's going to be really focusing on industry. There is also the Decarbonization Accelerator Act that should come together. And from our perspective, and that's also the understanding of discussions within the Commission, the amendment of the European climate law with the 2040 target should be coupled with the Clean Industrial Deal. So it's probably two separate instruments, one policy, one legislation, but they should come together and they should be two sides of the same coin. Yeah, for the rest, we first need to define the parameters.
Thank you. The Clean Industrial Deal is absolutely something on everyone's radar currently in Europe, so everyone will be curious to see what comes out of it. And also the next year we have the the review of the multi-annual financial framework and the budget. So this is yet another added level of the financing as well. I do see another question from the audience as well. I'll ask you to introduce yourself as well.
Hi, thank you. My name is Stefan Büttner. I'm chair of the Group of Experts in Energy Efficiency and the Task Force on Industrial Decarbonization of the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. And my question is in respect to companies that already have quite some ambitions and the shortcomings in the supply of green energy to them. So for instance, among the German manufacturers, we have data gathered that they want to reduce their emissions by about 23% on a 2019 basis by 2025. However, in order to be able to do that, they need a sufficient amount of renewables in the grid, planning permissions, etc., 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 to be able to deliver that. If you transpose that on the 1990 base, that would already meet a sector target. So how can we empower those companies to have a chance in achieving the goals that they would like to achieve? And how do we get that through to SMEs? Because we hear and we tackle a lot of the emission-intensive sectors in the large companies, but we have unfortunately also seen the shelving of the Covenant of Companies on Climate and Energy recently. And I believe those 25 million companies, the SME in Europe alone, they need our help and support so that we can get their ambitions into action. So what do you think on that?
Anyone would like to take this?
Yeah, maybe I can start. So with the IKEA supply chain, like I said, the biggest impact for us is obviously Scope 3. In our own production, we've been helping suppliers to go renewable, we call it. Go Renewable is the project. And we're now at 37% of IKEA direct suppliers who are now using renewable energy, 100%. So it's not impossible, and we still got a long way to go. But what we found is what we need to work with them. In some cases, we need to finance it, and we need to go into purchase power agreements with or on their behalf. So I think it takes quite a lot of hand holding. But we're quite pleased with the progress, and that's a big part of our emission reduction that we've seen so far. 24% from our baseline is due to that work with suppliers on renewables.
Thank you. Any final questions, reflections? I know that there are representatives from various businesses and sectors as well in the audience. So any final comments? I do see one. Yes, thank you. I'll ask you to introduce yourself as well.
Thank you for an interesting panel discussion. I think, Gonzalo, you said it very well to begin with, what we need as industry. But I made a wish list of 6 wishes. I know it's a lot. But first, we need to have reliable regulations that is transparent and is holistic. So it cannot be that the Industrial Emission Directive works against the decarbonization of plants because it's not modernized with technologies. So you have to look at it holistically. Grid and connectivity was always mentioned. If I want to have grid in Germany right now, in southern Germany, it's 10 years. So by the way, I'm coming from Rockwool, sorry, an industrial insulation company. And we use a lot of energy. If I want to decarbonize my full factories, I need around 2 nuclear power plants worth of electricity. But 10 years to get grid and connectivity in Bavarian, that doesn't work. Access to affordable renewable energy, and that you allow me to buy it in the right place. Right now with PPAs, I have to make physical PPAs instead of virtual PPAs in order to avoid they end up on the balance sheet. That means I cannot go to Spain and buy cheap solar PPAs. I have to buy somewhere in Northern Europe for Northern Europe. And it is only an accounting principle that needs to be changed. Some risk-willing capital for innovation projects. A typical conversion for me costs around 50 million euro per line. I need to develop these technologies as I go along. I have the feeling I pave the way as I do the implementation. It would be nice with some risk-willing capital to fund at least the initial stage. We have the talent, we have the ideas, we have the technologies, but we need a little bit of incentive in order to make this work for business. And finally, I never thought I would say this, but we need carbon pricing. electricity is simply not competitive as an energy source. Even with doubling the TTF, electricity is minimum 3 times as expensive per megawatt hour versus gas. I don't even want to mention what it is against coal. So even an industrialist can wish for carbon pricing. Thanks.
Thank you. One more from my side. Even though lots of the answer is electrification, at the moment the industrial energy consumption consists 31% of electricity, and I believe the big challenge is decarbonizing the 70 remaining percent, and for that it's a company by company question on what's the systemically most efficient path. Is it changing the hardware to electrify, or is it replacing the fossil fuel that it often is with something else, such as hoping for hydrogen or an interim low emission fuel? What's your take on that? How do we master getting through that?
I really like what you mentioned about the industry in Germany. I think what we have to do is to listen to industry and to understand the challenges of each industry, because the requirements of each industry are different. I mean, it still has nothing to do with food and beverage or the chemical. And we have launched an alliance in Spain that is Q0, and it's understanding the needs of different sectors. And I think we have to move into these kind of alliances to have this conversation and to listen to your demands, because you are fully convinced to move to that, even if it's more expensive. Now, electricity is more expensive than gas, but in the future, but this is precisely what we have to do, listen to industries. And in the corporate group, I fully agree with that, because it's what you want to decarbonize, but you are having challenges, and we have to cope with these challenges. Thank you.
No, I would come back to the carbon pricing. This is something where we are moving ahead, and we have ETS 1. We will have the reduction of allowances also from the non-power sectors, but we also have the revenues from the ETS that are being used back into things like the modernization fund projects, the innovation fund for the hydrogen, for the batteries. These are all coming back into supporting the innovation and the transition to facilitate, especially in the industry where it's hard to decarbonize. So there is a whole ecosystem of solutions that can support this transition. And then, of course, we need to find solutions globally, and that's where the proliferation of carbon pricing of one way or another, combined with the CBAM that serves as a kind of brake for us to make sure that we can maintain the level playing field while decarbonizing is these parts of equation.
No remarks yet?
Just to your point on, I mean, to reiterate again, 50% of the IKEA footprint comes from material use. So energy is a challenge for us, but materials and how they're made and land use change, all the deep value chain material questions are, honestly, I think that's the biggest headache that we have. When it comes to our own buildings, it's only 2% of the footprint, and there it's moving to renewable electricity, and it's phasing out gas and going to renewable heating and cooling. They're the two big actions that will give us an 85% reduction in our footprint by 2030.
Thank you very much. I do think we covered quite a lot of ground. Maybe it's time for us to finish, but with that I will ask every one of you to maybe say with one sentence what is something that you're looking forward to in the energy transition, either here or back at home, something that you're hopeful and excited to see, maybe. Simon, let's start with you again.
One sentence, a race to the top.
Perfect.
I said it already, but I can repeat the leadership by business in the way that, yes, we can make it, we can manage that.
Well, we have a lot of it with us here and in the CLGs. Leadership from Europe maybe as well? Matt?
An integrated offshore grid in the North Sea with 300 gigawatts of offshore wind with an effective UK-EU relationship.
The final word is for you.
For us, it's networks and policy certainty.
Policy certainty, wonderful. Thank you very much. Please welcome me in thanking the whole panel. Wonderful discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We're now moving to the final part, which is a bit late, so apologies, and thank you for staying with us, which I'm delighted to be joined by Chris Stark, who is the UK's new Head of Mission Control for Clean Power 2030. So this year in the UK, we have seen a change of government, and with that government has come a mission approach to actually how it's looking at the issues. Clean power, we know, as we've mentioned, as we've been discussing, is really needed, and we've got to accelerate action. We've got 5 years to 2030 with some quite strict targets. So this week, Chris, we have had the UK announce its NDC, 2035 NDC, obviously setting that ambition level, which when I think back to actually, 6-7 years ago when I started my role, that was when we still had a 80% by 2050 target.
Right, yeah.
We now have a net zero by 2050 target, but also we now have an 81% by 2035 target, but we're not quite on track yet to even meet our 2030 targets. So, how is the UK going to get there?
Well, we're going to try bloody hard. So that's the answer to the question, I think. So, let me say a bit of my story for many of you who wouldn't know me. In the UK, I, until recently, led the Climate Advisory Body, the body that oversees climate progress in the UK. And all of the targets that you've just mentioned came from advice that the team that I led provided. So I think the first thing to say in the UK is that it's tremendous that we have a legal framework in place that allows a technical and scientific body to provide advice like that, and for that to then be turned into serious pledges in law and submitted to the UN process under the Paris Agreement. It's exactly how things should work. And part of the job that we also did when I was at the Climate Change Committee was provide advice on how those targets should be met. So we looked very seriously, not just at what the appropriate target was, but also how you would achieve it. And actually the achievability of that target is a big part of the advice that was offered by the CCC. And I absolutely believe that our 2030 NDC for 68% reduction and our 2035 NDC for an 81% reduction are online for the path that we need to be by the middle of the century and are achievable. But my God, we've got to start moving. So it's really, really important that we don't assume that setting a target is the job here. I think it's tremendous that we had a Prime Minister that came out, and let's be honest, he set that NDC early this week. That is a genuine sign of leadership. But if you listen to what he said when Sir Keir Starmer spoke earlier this week, he didn't only name an NDC, he then moved on immediately to talk about what he, I think, sees as his key tentpole pledge for achieving that, which is the clean power target, and that's what I lead. So I've moved out of the advisor role into now being in charge of delivery of one of the key aspects of that target. And let me just say something about clean power. Clean power is absolutely fundamental to the overall achievement of net zero in the UK economy and across economies across the world, because clean power is the first step towards electrifying the economy and electrifying end uses. That is the majority of the job if we're going to decarbonize our economy. So, we used to have a pledge to achieve clean power by 2035. The new government has come in to say they want to do that 5 years sooner. That is amongst the most stretching pledges and targets of any government in the entire world. And I absolutely believe that we can achieve it. I wouldn't take this job otherwise, but it will only be achieved if we move much, much more quickly to develop the key infrastructure, something I know you've been talking about today, and move much, much more quickly to connect that infrastructure to a more reinforced energy network, an energy grid. All of those things are possible, and it is entirely possible for us to reach a position where we have something you can call clean power. I will say now that we will have some fossil still on the system by 2030, but we will not be using our gas plant very frequently at all. It's really there as a reserve capacity for when the wind doesn't blow in the UK. I think we can do that in the next 6 years. I'm going to buy myself an extra year, if I may. So I'm going to look at I'm going to call the 2030 target the end of 2030. Those extra days matter. But the key thing for me is we are not really thinking about decarbonisation at all. We're thinking more about how we get stuff built, how we put infrastructure in the ground, and how we do something much more fundamental than just decarbonising the power system, how we get jobs from that, how we get supply chain benefit from that, and how the consumer sees cheaper electricity at the end of that. I believe all of those things are possible. And the final thing I'll say about 2030 is the beauty of it being so near term, so proximate, is that it doesn't leave much doubt that we are serious. We have set that target because it is near term. We are trying to change the way in which our institutions and infrastructure developers coexist and make things happen. And we are making it super clear that we are, in a sense, going to take a more hands-on approach to developing the energy system that we want to see over the next 5 years, in the full knowledge that after 2030, the options open up. And we can move more into the task of electrifying end use, heat, cooling, industry, and especially transport. So I think it's incredibly important that we set this pledge, and that there's no escaping the fact that we're going to have to do something about it in one parliamentary term. And that is, for me, the reason I took this job on, because I think there is a way to do that. And I would love to sit on a stage like this in 5 years' time and say, well, 5 years, we'll be almost there. I'll say we're almost at it now.
So, I mean, we've heard, you said that it's possible, but at the same time, we know it's going to be hard. We've heard some of the challenges actually through the last panel, so particularly around grids and around some of the infrastructure, and you mentioned that yourself. But I mean, how do we overcome those challenges? How do we actually do that acceleration? Bear in mind that we've still got projects in the UK that are not yet actually online, that, because they're not connected to the grid, but actually, ready to go.
Yeah, I think you can overthink this. I mean, the position that we face in Britain is not one you'll find in every country in the world. So that there is enough in the pipeline of projects to get to clean power by 2030. What we are not doing is developing those projects at the appropriate pace. So that's a nice problem to have. So essentially that gives me a different challenge. We don't need to start from scratch. There may be some areas where we've got to do something that's more first of a kind. And we can talk a bit more about that if that's interesting. But in the main, the job is to look through the queue of projects that we have in that pipeline. All of these projects, bar a couple, are being led by private developers. So what we've got to do is something that I think is more radical. We've got to say, well, look, some of those projects we want to see developed sooner than others. And actually taking a more hands-on approach to that is not something that previous incarnations of the government would have done. I think it's important that we do. So we need to say a few things. We need to be clear about what sort of electricity system we want by 2030. And I'm very sure we can do that. We've been informed recently by a piece of independent work by our energy system operator in Britain, who's given us some choices about that. We're gonna very shortly in the next few weeks spell out what, more specifically, the sort of energy system will look like by 2030, right down to regional level. That then gives us more ability to do to take a more selective approach to the management of the projects that are in the queue for the grid. And we have a huge queue. And I'm sure that's true in other countries too, but we have a grid queue management system that was established essentially to connect coal-fired power stations 30 or 40 years ago. It is not appropriate for the huge volume of projects that we're now seeing that are clean. We think 800 gigawatts of projects in the UK that have a grid connection agreement. We will never need 800 gigawatts of new projects in the UK, so we have to be more selective about that. And if we are more selective, and if we do that in a way that is that doesn't cause us to have additional legal risk and challenge in the courts, then I think we can bring the right projects on, as long as we support the grid to be built. There is 80 or so projects, grid reinforcement projects in the UK. Only 4 of them are not on the right timetable for 2030. So we can bring those forward, and then we can use our policy tools to try and connect as much clean power as we can to that system. I mentioned very briefly that there may be more first-of-a-kind type projects that would help with us. The ones that will really matter to 2030 in our power system, our clean power system, are the ones that provide flexibility. So flexibility on the demand side, but especially flexibility on the supply side. So if we have long-duration energy storage projects, these are pumped hydro storage, perhaps we'll have some novel projects like liquid air projects, things that provide low-carbon flexibility of the type that gas-fired generation provides now. We will be able to squeeze more and more gas off the system and get to the goal of clean power, and we'll do so in a way that's cheaper to the consumer. So those are the sorts of projects that I think we will want to be more proactive in seeing the development of those projects on a faster timetable.
So, I mean, obviously that's, how the UK is going to achieve it. But in the context of COP and the commitments that were made last year in terms of tripling renewables, doubling energy efficiency, we need other countries to be moving as well. And certainly I've been, there is, going around the blue zone, there is, hearing a number of different countries, their different approaches, but they're all at different stages. But how do we help other countries also to move forward this fast, to mean that actually when we get to 2030, it's not just the UK that has moved forward, but actually we've helped others to move forward as well?
Yeah, and I think this is why I absolutely love coming to COP. And sometimes I wonder why I come to COP. I'm sure in the room you feel the same. You come here occasionally, you think, what is this for? And it's because you find, of course, there's a community of interests, and we are all admittedly trying to do the same things, but in different ways. So I think it's so interesting. We had a meeting this morning with the Hong Kong government, who face a very similar challenge of trying to clean up their power system, and they're approaching it in a different way to us. They're very heavy on hydrogen as an answer to that. That's not something that I think is the way to do it in the UK, but it's so interesting to hear an Asian economy talk that way about a different way to achieve the same target. Listen, I think the best thing we can do is deliver this. So I think we need to, as we have done in the past, pioneer our approach with our pioneering approach to renewables, and the way in which we now contract and procure vast volumes of renewables at really genuinely world-leading scale. I think we are back. So the next auction for offshore wind will be next year. That is going to be, I hope, the biggest auction we have ever held in the UK, and probably the biggest ever in the world. And if that's successful and reveals a strong low price for the consumer, then I think we can say that we're back at the table, we're working. I have to say it does help that the US is stepping off that ambition at the moment for offshore wind, because suddenly there's a lot of investors suddenly interested in the UK market again. I'm very happy to take their interest. So that's the first thing. And I think the second thing is that we do have an idea of there being an alliance of countries that are trying to push for clean power. So David Lammy is our Foreign Secretary. He's pushing this Clean Power Alliance, which was a manifesto pledge from the Labour Party before they came into government. That is tremendously exciting. That's the forum of high ambition countries who are seeking to move very fast to decarbonise their grid, probably not as fast as 2030, I should say. So again, we can be amongst the leading members of that coalition. But we will learn from each other. We will share supply chains. And I think we will also see that there are pitfalls to this that we can avoid as we collectively push towards that. The best demonstration of ambition is not setting goals and targets, it's delivering them. So I think that in the end is the thing that we've got to do. And I'm going to keep coming back to COP, and I'm going to keep telling that story, because my story from now on is not about setting these new targets. Happy as I am that I've done that for the last 10 years or so, it's delivering it. And I want to tell that story because I think in the end that's the most compelling reason to follow.
Yeah. So also just obviously you mentioned about the Clean Power Alliance. Also the UK has led in terms of the Power and Past Coal Alliance. And one of the things that obviously we had Maria talking about in detail at the beginning was that, moving away from fossil fuels, so how we phase those out. But obviously we're in a COP where, the issue of fossil fuels has been, at the forefront really. Last year was the first year that we actually got it in the text. But how, and I've been to talks where actually I'm still hearing about countries that are committed to fossil fuels for a number of years, even if they're trying to move to clean power. So, what more do we want to see from countries around that in terms of their energy transition? So they're not just looking at clean power, but they're also phasing out fossil fuels.
Yeah, I mean, listen, fossil fuels, I'm afraid, do have an enduring role, but my goodness, we've got to squeeze down on what that is. And I think it's important to say that I am taking, a pragmatic approach to what is a radical target in the clean power target. We are accepting that in the UK, you are right to say, Bev, that we have moved away from coal. This in the last few weeks, we closed the final coal-fired power plant in the UK, and it was a tremendous achievement to do that. I say it was tremendous because we did so in a way that allowed us to, I think, genuinely claim that we managed it well. We phased it out with a really strong mix of policy, and most important of all, we took the workforce with us. So when that final coal plant closed, it was a celebration of the workforce that we had in that final station in Nottingham in England, and that's tremendous. The reason we're able to close coal, though, is because we have a very extensive gas fleet in the UK. I do not want to see other countries follow that model, if I'm honest with you, so we need to demonstrate that we can close that more rapidly and move on to the genuinely clean power system that I want to see. But I think we should worry about security of supply. And one of the advantages of the clean power system is that we gain a new form of security, which is an international geopolitical security, because we're not so dependent on the importation of fossil fuels from other parts of the world and prices that are set in global markets and can be seriously influenced by dictators. Yeah. So, I want to move off fossil fuels, but I also want to tell the story that we're doing so rapidly, but in a conscious way with security of supply in mind. That's why we are retaining largely that gas fleet that we will have probably into the 2030s, because we will need it. There will be occasions when the wind doesn't blow, and we will have to turn to gas. And we'll probably have to continue to do that for at least the next 10 years. But I think that's how you win the argument, that we're taking a pragmatic approach to that. And frankly, that is a good use of fossil fuels if you are trying to decarbonize the rest of it. And if we get into that kind of pragmatic argument, I think we are into a much better place. I've been talking recently about the kind of recent trend here is that we're moving away from, follow my spelling on this, profits, and that's PHETS, to pragmatists. I think this is the age of pragmatists now. It's not the age of prophesying the future. I'm one of the people that used to do that, talked about the benefits of net zero, the future that we need to see. But we do need to have a pragmatic approach on how we achieve it. So if we're going to talk about fossil fuels, let's talk about phasing them out, but doing so rapidly in a way that I think we can take people with us, accepting that there are energy industries that employ countless people and are hugely valuable to the economies that are trying to do something on climate. I think, again, the UK has a good story to tell on that. We have a story about phasing out fossil fuels that is largely determined by our own geology. We're going to run out of the fossil fuels that we have in the North Sea by around 2050. So if we can't model it, then how can we expect others to do that? So I think it's really important that we demonstrate that we understand that and that we move as quickly as we can away from fossil fuels in a way that takes the workforce, particularly of oil and gas, with us.
Brilliant. Now, we are nearly at time, but I have had somebody in the audience who sneakily sent me a question which they want to ask,
Very good.
which is that they want to hear your views in terms of the skills transition to support or drive clean energy. And there is obviously, there's a just transition stand here. Skills is coming up again and again in terms of the skill shortages. I've heard about shortage of engineers. There's also a shortage of those that are actually going to install. So, yeah, what are your thoughts in terms of how we accelerate that?
We in the UK have a massive skills shortage. I don't think there's any doubt about that. We're not the only country that's in that position. This, for me, is going to be, I think, one of the fundamental determinants of whether we're successful in clean power. So I can tell you now, because we've done the work, that we will need to see investment of a truly awesome scale to achieve what we need to do by 2030. So in pounds sterling, probably an extra 200 billion of capital investment just in the energy sector alone. About a quarter of that is network investment. The rest of it is mostly investment in renewables. Now, we can train up the workforce to do that, or we can choose to pay for it and import it. And those are our choices alone if you want to achieve clean power by 2030. I would much rather do the former and not a lot of the latter. And the beauty of it is that I often feel, and maybe I'll be controversial if I can for a second, I often feel with the discussion of skills that we project to the long future. I mean, how many times do I hear now that we need AI skills or we need, advanced nuclear fusion skills? We may need those things by 2050. But the majority of the skills are technician skills. They are pouring concrete, they're erecting steel structures, they're jointing. These are skills that once you have them in the economy become immensely transferable for all sorts of other things that are not even in the energy sector. So I think there's a real challenge for us, and I think a chance for us to change the discussion of the skills pipeline into one we're much more pragmatic, back to my pragmatic point. We're saying to people, this is something that's going to happen right across the country, literally right across the country. If you follow that course in that college, in 2 years' time, there's a job for you in that area of the country where you live. There's nothing like that. So I think that's tremendous. So if we pull this off, this is going to be an enormous boon to the British economy, especially the regional British economy that's not London and the southeast. And for me, that's why I think we should be doing this, actually. I think that the idea of jobs, extra supply chain industries, and plus lower bills is ultimately the secret sauce that sells this. It's not decarbonisation for most people, although I think that's a happy advantage of doing it too. We need to, the job story in particular, the skill story that with it is I think the one that cuts through regardless of your view of climate.
Thank you. Now, we are going to have to bring this to a close, but I just want to give you a chance to say any final thoughts you have in terms of what you want to see come out of COP in terms of, positive outcomes by the end of it.
Well, look, this is an expert audience, so you're in the blue zone, so I think you probably have your own views about what kind of outcome you want from COP. But I am a climate geek, fully admit it. So I will also admit that I came to this COP slightly worried this was going to be a bad COP. And I do not feel that way when I'm here. Now, the negotiations will pick up next week. This is a difficult COP for all sorts of reasons, but it's particularly difficult because we are going to have to address the climate finance issue. It took us far, far, far too long to get to 100 billion. Now we need to talk in a far greater quantum about that. So my hope for it is that we have a positive discussion about that. I don't know what the final text will be on it. And in a sense, the final text will be something we have to keep working on because we know the finance issue is going to continue after this COP. But I would like to see something that is ambitious on climate finance. I would like to see us continue the ambition and the progress that we've made on adaptation. It's the issue that doesn't get the focus it deserves. I work on mitigation, but I think adaptation is going to become more and more important. And then the final thing is not really a COP text issue so much as a sort of theory of the COP itself. I am more and more aware of the fact that the text that we always end up talking about by the end of next week, the thing that will be grabbing the headlines, that text is very important, no doubt. But in a sense, that represents the floor of ambition. And, you know, every year we slightly raise that floor, and it's a very important process for the COP to do. I am interested in pushing the ceiling of ambition. And the ceiling of ambition is not always pushed by national states. So I would like to see us have more and more of a focus on what private sector actors, non-state actors, cities, regions, what they can do to push the envelope of ambition outside of the formal COP process. And that is where you find the optimism. And you can see that particularly in the energy transition, but it's happening in other parts too. So we latch on to that idea of there being coalitions of willing, ambitious corporates or countries or groups. Then I think that's how we keep this process going after this COP and into the next one and the one after it. So I think more and more we've got to be more accepting of that. And that probably means that the COP process also needs to be a process that tracks those commitments. So too frequently we see these commitments, especially made by the private sector, and they're not followed up in the way that you would expect a national commitment to be followed up through an NDC, for example. I think it's legitimate that we think about the COP process moving that way too. So let's see how that works out.
Yep. And on that note, I'm going to say, what we need is leadership. We need leadership to come out of the COP. We need leadership from governments, and we need leadership from business. We're seeing that already, but we still need to keep building on that and building on that. And what we say, which is, which we mean business say as well, which is the virtuous circle of how we can actually bring that round in a loop so it's continually ramping up that ambition. I want to say thank you for everyone for staying with us. Chris might be here for a few minutes. If you do have any immediate questions, sorry, we haven't been able to open up further for questions. And just thank you for listening online as well. And we look forward to following up with any of you if you have questions. And thank you very much.